the Deputy Director responsible for vocational education at the DFE, and as I said, Nick used to be my boss in the DFE, but Families at Risk Division, when we did big family reforms and family intervention projects. So I'm really, really pleased to have him here today.
And as Wendy says, this is an area that I'm no stranger to. I'm also no stranger to Birmingham, actually, having spent 8 or 9 years working for the local education authority here for in Brick House back in the 90s. Dealing with many of the same issues, actually. I headed up what was then the Community Education Service and health education in the city. But as a civil servant, we tend to move on to different jobs every few years, and the last 3 years, or 2.5 years, I've been responsible for some quite far-reaching reforms in vocational education provision, and I'll explain a bit more about what I mean by that. But provision that mainly affects 14 to 19-year-olds and in fact affects young people over that age. So the teenagers in families with multiple problems. It's probably worth me saying, start off with, in terms of a general philosophy, education holds the key to a whole range of things in our society. It's qualifications that provide the opportunities for a whole range of employment. Without those qualifications, those employment routes are closed. Without at least basic levels of literacy and numeracy, there are so many routes that are closed within our society. It's very difficult to engage in that society. And I know those of you that are working with families with multiple problems will come across literacy and numeracy barriers that actually prevent accessing even the most basic services. And there's a significant amount of international literature that shows that education is the most effective intervention in relation to poverty, drug dependency, the position of women, and so on. Now, obviously, the stabilising of a family, having basic levels of security, developing planning skills within the family, those are precursors to actually being able to get the kids to school or to get into training or employment. But nevertheless, ultimately success, ultimately turning around, is about getting a level of education which enables people to fulfil their aspirations within our society, ultimately through employment. Okay. Just wanted to say a bit about what young people in this country currently do, to put this in some context. Now, about 40% of young people go to sixth form and they take A-levels. It is actually a minority. You would think, by reading newspapers, that the young people that didn't were in a tiny minority, but they're not. But young people that go to sixth form college, take A-levels, then they have a very high probability of securing some sort of employment. And those that do well in that will do very well in society. So, what about the rest? Well, there's a group, about 6%, that of this age group that are not in education, employment or training. It's not a group that's actually getting any bigger, but there is a resistant group of young people that fall into that category. And then there is a much larger group of young people who are undertaking training in FE colleges. The other education training is mainly private providers that provide training, often for quite vulnerable young people. And then there are young people that go on to apprenticeships or that work and do education at the same time. And one of the things that I found when I took over this area was that there were some examples of really excellent training that led into work. I mean, apprenticeships, by and large, although there's been a lot of work to improve the quality of apprenticeships, Apprenticeships are jobs that involve training. Young people that go on those have a very high probability of securing employment as a consequence. And there are some courses that young people take at college where they get qualifications that are highly regarded and enable them to enter skilled employment. But there was a review that was undertaken back in 2011 by Professor Alison Wolf, which found that probably around 350,000, possibly about 20% of all young people, were taking courses that weren't recognised by employers, that weren't of real value to them in moving on to employment. And what she found, that there were a whole series of drivers behind this, but some of the main drivers were in schools, the way that the performance tables work, and post-16, the way that post-16 education was funded. It was funded, for example, on the basis of qualifications passed. Now that probably seemed a good idea at the time. I'm sure my predecessors that brought that in and the ministers that decided on it thought it was a good idea. But what happened is you put young people into the qualifications they could pass, which is absolutely fine if they're able young people. But if they're young people that need more support, putting them in for a qualification that actually is not going to be of any value for them entering education is demoralising for them, it's misleading them. And it removed a lot of the challenge from the system, the challenge that would make it clear for young people the importance of being ambitious, of working harder, and to be honest, for those people that were teaching them to teach at a higher level and to look for them to progress onto more valuable qualifications. And at the heart of this was the issue of maths and English, whether students have a GCSE or an equivalent qualification in maths and English. Because about 40% of students leave school without that, and those 40% are, within that 40% are almost the entire group of young people that will be unemployed, and the group of young people that will find it very difficult to access any skilled or reasonably paid qualification. And pretty scandalously, actually, nearly all of them then didn't secure that qualification afterwards. And there's been some very significant changes over the last 2 years that are starting to impact now. The biggest changes came in last September and this coming September that's seeking to really turn that around. And I think it's important to say within that context that this isn't just something that affects the young people, it also affects employers, because employers find it very difficult to recruit people with technical and STEM skills. So the sorts of skills that people are looking for to work in the small factories that are dotted all over the country, they're not looking for graduates. They're looking for people who will do technician-type jobs. They'll be working on machines and computers. They need a certain standard of education. They're not looking for graduates. Those jobs are there and they can't fill them. And in fact, I mean, a friend of mine, where I live in Worcester, runs a small engineering factory, and his best source of technicians is from Poland, where he gets those trained people and brings them into the country. So there are opportunities that are there, and young and employers are often quite critical of the skills of young people when they come out of school. Okay, a couple of quotes here from my minister, Matt Hancock, who is a very ambitious minister who has moved this area forward. I mean, it's actually been it's been very good working for someone that wanted to see change quickly. It's enabled things to move forward much more quickly, and enabled more of a focus on this area than certainly there has been for some time. And the focus that he has placed on it, and to the same extent the focus of the department as a whole, is about raising quality. because it's quality that gives employers and young people the confidence that the qualifications they're taking will be of value and that the students that take them will be employable. The changes that are taking place that relate to raising quality are, on the one hand, expanding the range of choices at 16 to 19 and the higher quality choices that exist. And I'll run through, during the course of this presentation, some of the options that are in place. Raising the standard qualifications overall. This goes alongside raising the participation age, which is now 17, participation in education and training, and will go up to 18 next year. And also a really strong focus in raising literacy and numeracy, English and maths. The options that are available for young people, and I think being familiar with these options is really important for anyone who is working with vulnerable families, with teenagers, because an awareness of these options gives those young people the opportunity to match their needs to what is available. Because the most demoralising thing for a young person is to end up doing something that really isn't right for them, that they don't succeed in. There are apprenticeships, jobs with training alongside, high competition to get in them, but they are offered to students who will have maybe a few GCSEs. Then there are advanced apprenticeships for those that have a good set of GCSEs that will be at an A level, and higher apprenticeships right up to graduate and postgraduate level apprenticeships. So all different educational levels. Traineeships that are for young people with very few qualifications, but which have the drive to enter work or to get onto an apprenticeship within the next 6 months. It's about motivation. Supported internships, which are an option for young people that have particular needs and have a much more supported entrance to working into employment. And I'll say a bit more about all of these in a bit. And then yes, there are some people who will get a job and then will also train alongside that. The expectation is that every young person is undertaking education and training up 17 now, up to 18, even if they have a job. Because doing a job without any training input at 16 means that you may be employed, but you are not going to have any opportunity to progress from what will be a very low paid job. So that's why the participation age encompasses education training for all young people. And then the option that most young people will take is what is called a study programme. And what a study programme is an approach to tailoring the education that a 16 to 19-year-old has to their needs, their ambitions, their prior attainment, and it is focused on the outcome, on where that young person wants to get to, whether that's employment, moving on to further training, university. And now, when Ofsted inspect provision by schools and colleges, they will look for the clarity of the ambition for that young person, its appropriateness to them in terms of their motivation, their what they've previously got, and what's being offered. The next slide sets out what this picture of provision will look like. And as I say, not all of this is in place. Most of it will be in place by this September, or if not, the September afterwards. But if we look on the far left-hand side, where you have general education at 14 to 16. This is about giving young people the education skills that they need for life. It's not about developing skills for employment. It's too early for that. The risk of young people going down blind alleys, doing things that they don't want to do, or training for a job that won't be there when they actually get it. At this age, it's about developing a core set of skills. So, core academic subjects, maths, English, science, things like that, would take up just over half, say 5 GCSEs of their programme, with then the option of doing other GCSEs or qualifications that we think we're going to call technical awards. But there is currently a list of approved non-GCSE qualifications that are recognised in the performance tables, all of which are high quality, all of which lead on to other training and education at 16. It's published annually, and by only recognising these qualifications in the performance tables, those are the majority of the qualifications that schools now offer. There's about 180 of them. There were nearly 3,500, some of them really big, which meant students could spend a lot of time studying qualification and very little time focusing on things like maths and English that they really needed. So by a set of rules of what's published in the, what's reported in the performance tables, there's a strong steer towards schools and colleges to provide a mix that's tailored to the child but best suited to getting those core general education skills. But at 16, when a young person would be looking to their route into employment or university, there's a wider range of choices. There's A-levels, there's taking A-levels, or a vocational qualification, and again there's approved lists of vocational qualifications. One of which are things that are called tech levels. Now, the first list of tech levels was published last December. Tech levels are the equivalent of A-levels, and they're all high quality, they're endorsed by employers, and they lead into a specific occupation. But there is also there a list intermediate technical education, which is at a lower level. It's at GCSE level. The first list of these qualifications will be published in the autumn, but these, they're quite large qualifications, but they lead into things like plumbing, or hairdressing, or bricklaying. And they're qualifications that are tailored to students who are not working at a high academic level, but want to develop the skills and qualifications that they need to get a good job. There's also apprenticeships and traineeships, which I'll say a bit more about later. And the way that school and college league tables will work in the future is these are the things that will be reported as headline measures, because it's this list of things that will enable a young person at 18 to enter employment. These are the things that that provide a valuable outcome for that young person. I've mentioned apprenticeships, and an apprenticeship is a job. So you apply for a job with an employer. That includes training. The government funds the training. There is a great deal of competition. On average, there's about 12 young people that apply for each apprenticeship. Every employer willing to provide an apprenticeship will be supported by the government. And there's a very big programme of work to expand the number of apprenticeships. And this is focused not just on the big employers, but also on funding small employers locally to offer apprenticeships. So really, any employer that is willing to take on a young person will get funding for the training of that young person as an apprenticeship, and there is a national apprenticeship service that is there to sort all of that out for the employers. So There is options locally for employers to provide apprenticeships, and whenever you have that contact with any employer, it's certainly something worth doing, is to encourage them to do it. It's much easier than many employers think, the process, and it enables them to train someone to work in their business to get the people that they want. Now, a new programme that we started off last September, that is still quite small but is expanding very quickly, are traineeships. Now, traineeships are for young people that don't have many qualifications, that are motivated to go into work, and the aim is to get them into some form of employment within a 6-month period. It extends from 16 up to 24. And it's an education programme combined with work experience. So the young people will do work preparation training, which is about both the attitudes and skills that you need within the workplace. They will also do an extended period of work experience within a workplace, and they will continue to do English and maths at the same time. I said it's a programme that's expanding quickly. There's over 500 training organisations across the country that are planning to offer traineeships, and a lot of big companies coming on board. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to the person that's leading on this work for Barclays, who are taking on about 2,000 traineeships. And Barclays are specifically taking on young people who are at the point they take them on, not in employment, education and training. And the young people that they've taken on, they go through quite an intensive programme of training, they do work experience, they work in a bank, and around 70% of those young people are securing employment within Barclays banks. And that's a very big shift from going from need to getting a job within a bank. And Barclays are actually speaking to some of the other banks to see if they would be interested in joining in the programme, so they have a pool of recruits that come out of this particular cohort. And there will be, over the next few months, a series of announcements as more employers come on board and start offering traineeships. And there's also a programme to encourage small employers to offer traineeships as well. It's also a programme that's supported by the National Apprenticeships Service, so it's another programme where there is funding to support it for those that, you come across employers or organisations that are interested in offering traineeships. And a successful outcome for a traineeship, well actually there's 3, but probably the majority at the moment, the sort of 3,000 or so that have already completed it, about 40% go on to an apprenticeship, and about 20% go into work, and about 10% go back into education, and that's also a successful outcome if what they're doing is studying at the next level for a valuable qualification. Because it could be that having spent their time doing work experience in, a relatively manual job, they think, yes, I really am going to have to go back and get some qualifications, and that's what they do. A programme, it's certainly worth looking out for those of you working with vulnerable families. University technical colleges were set up to provide education from 14 for young people that were particularly interested at an early age in having a more vocational focus to their education. So although they still do the English and maths and science, and it's, that's still the majority of the work that they do, they are in a college that has been developed with employers, and it gives them the opportunity to focus on particular vocational areas and move on at 16 to do much more specialist training, maybe in catering, for example, or construction trades or engineering. And from last September, we introduced a reform that allowed FE colleges to recruit students at 14 and to set up their own 14 to 16 centre. And an increasing number of these are being set up, and this provides another option for young people to go to not to go into school at 14, but to go into college and prepare for going into a course that will enable them to train at 16 to do a particular job. I mentioned supported internships, and these are intended for young people with special education needs statement, learning difficulty assessment, the new education healthcare plan, so with particular needs. And what they provide is time spent in a workplace, supported by structured study, but with a job coach who will help work with them to develop the skills they need to work to get work. So again, quite a few of the families that you work with will have young people who will fall into this category, and supported internships is an option for them. As is the youth contract, which funds local small providers to work with young people who have no GCSEs or only one GCSE, or young offenders, and its aim is essentially to engage young people. So it's very much a sort of a first stage programme for young people who are at risk or disengaged from education. I think it's worth saying at the same time there is funding for disadvantaged young people that I'm sure you're aware of. The 16 to 19 bursary fund, it gives £1,200 a year to the most vulnerable young people, so those that are care leavers, that are in care, that are disabled, or that are receiving benefits, income support in their own right. But there's also a larger proportion of funding that's allocated to the school or college that they can use to pay for transport, for example, to pay for equipment, to give payments to the students. The school or college will do an assessment and work out the best way that it's paid. And then from September, there will also be free school meals available right up to the age of 18. So that helps to reduce some of the costs associated with engaging more vulnerable young people within education. Finally, just some things to consider. What I've described is quite a significant range of changes. They are changes that are being introduced through a whole range of ways, changing in the way that post-6 education is funded, changing in the way school and college league tables operate, the performance measures that they're judged by through approved lists of qualifications. They'll take some time to bed in. It'll take some time before this sort of whole picture is understood and is necessarily in place. A lot of it is already in place, but what anyone who's negotiating the system needs to understand is what is the criteria that I really need to think about for a particular young person in engaging them or re-engaging them in education. And I've put down here sort of 5 sort of areas to think about. First of all, employability. Now, all of the research suggests that the key to getting a job are really 2 things: some motivation and English and maths skills. And addressing those two things are the precursor to any young person progressing into employment, and work experience of any sort is absolutely key to that. It's work experience. Young people, even with no qualifications, who have relevant, well, really any work experience, find it much easier to access work. And young people with loads of qualifications, without work experience, find it much more difficult to access work. So the opportunity to do any sort of work experience, volunteering, anything is of real value. Qualifications, as I've mentioned, there are a lot of qualifications, and a significant number of them are of very limited value. They're too small, they're of too low level, they're not recognised by employers. And that's why a series of approved lists of qualifications have been published. They're on the gov.uk website. They're increasingly being sort of shown on other websites. And it's only those that will be used to judge performance in schools and colleges. But it is certainly worth looking at whether the qualification that someone is doing is on that list, because there is nothing more demoralising, as you know, I've spoken to loads of young people that have said that. They've done a qualification that they thought, I don't know, sports development, say they thought I'll be able to work in the leisure industry. Well, not with that qualification. Sorry. And so being aware of that is really important. Location. One would have thought that the courses offered match local employment opportunities, but that often isn't the case. I mean, if any of you read the last Ofsted report in FE colleges, they quoted one college where they could only find 10% of the courses match the local opportunities locally. So actually someone taking a course where there were jobs locally is quite important. Sounds obvious, but it's worth checking. Progression. Courses need to lead on to something. They are not things in their own right. So if you're doing a course that itself isn't recognised, will it lead on to something that is? And does the young person realise that this course in itself, the reason they're taking it is to go on to another level of educational training? Because otherwise, if they get to the end of the course and it's all a big surprise, that's, again, very demoralising. And again, every course on the approved list does lead on to something else and has been selected on that basis. And then finally, the funding that's available for more disadvantaged young people. I hope you found that useful. Please do use the slides. There is all of this information and more and links and things like that on gov.uk, which is almost impossible to find anything well, it's not designed to find things by menus. What you have to do is search for particular words. So search for the words in here and you'll find it otherwise.